science. Not sure we're going to actually shape the future of science, but we'll certainly talk about science and its role in society. I'm Joe Palca. I'm a science correspondent for NPR, which is National Public Radio, and we do more than radio now, so they insist we call the company NPR and not National Public Radio. Small point. Before we get started, I just wanted to ask a really important question. Can I see a show of hands of how many people like this log fireplace? And how many people think it's wrong and inappropriate? Okay. Small point. Well, anyway. So
it keeps warm, actually.
So I'm going to be speaking with Maria-Elena Torres-Padilla. She is here for a variety of reasons, but today the relevant one is that she's a co-chair of this year's meeting. She's also the first young scientist to be asked to be co-chair. And I can tell you now that she's the director of an institute at the Helmholtz Center in Munich, Germany, on epigenetics, and we may get to talk about epigenetics, but probably not, because that's a little esoteric for what we are going to talk about. But I thought what would be interesting is to sort of find out what it takes to become a young scientist at the World Economic Forum, and then why it's important to have a co-chair who's a young scientist. So tell us a little bit about your path to science to begin with.
So, hello everyone. Just really very quickly, so I actually became interested in biology from very early on, and maybe some of you would be scared if I tell you that I decided I want to be a scientist when I was 13. My father was very worried about it and said, are you sure? You have to explore many possibilities. But I kind of tried to see other things, and I came back to the beginning and said, I want to be a researcher. So it's actually from quite early on. When I said this to my students, they get very scary, and they sort of don't like it. So I'm a biologist by training. I became interested in really understanding how cells function, what are the signals that they receive, how they can output signals, and more recently I became interested in how the DNA is actually used by the cells so that you can have liver cells, heart cells, and so on and so forth. I've lived in actually 5 different countries. So I said I'm from Mexico, then I moved to Paris for my PhD. I've been in Europe for the last 18 years of my career, and I'm very passionate about what I'm doing, so I hope I can transmit you a little bit that. Coming to your question of why I think it's important to have a young scientist as a co-chair, I think this is a great opportunity to bring science to the policymakers, to the business leader, and to really discuss about how important the scientific endeavor should be and has been for innovation. And actually, I'm very happy to be carrying that hat, and I hope I'm going to do a good job.
Well, that's interesting, because I spend my career talking to scientists, and a lot of them can't wait to go back to the lab, and they look at talking to the media or talking to Congress or talking to policymakers or business people as a chore and unpleasant. But you're taking the time. Why?
I think that the main reason is that I am passionate about what I do, and because I try to do it as best as I can, I recognize the importance that it can have for the society. And I actually think that it's important that all scientists take the time to explain you why is it important what we do, what we can actually bring to the society. I think, so yesterday during the speech of the Premier, we heard that innovation is the only road to development. And I could argue that without basic research, there's no innovation. So I think, if you put these things together, it's pretty obvious that we have to be more active in communicating to all of you why this is important.
Well, explain a little bit about that, because it's possible to look at basic research and say, this is very esoteric, I don't know what it's ever going to be good for, why don't you study something important?
Yeah.
And what do you say when people say, study something important or relevant or that's going to save me tomorrow?
I think you touch a very important point, because I think the choice of the question that you study is very important. And so you have to try to see, why this might be important in terms of usefulness for the society, societal impact. Although I actually would also argue that knowledge by itself is anthropologically important for the society, so the generation of knowledge should be on its own a motive for doing science. But there's so many examples about things that you have now in your everyday life, say artificial intelligence, or say insulin for the diabetes treatment. This is all coming from science. So without science, you don't have drugs. If we now don't study basic mechanisms, in 20 years we don't have pathways to target to make drugs to cure disease. It's just probably the time frame that we are used to seeing achievements in the basic research area is different. And that's what one has to have in mind.
So do you, you're a young scientist, so you haven't had the perspective of older people, such as myself, but do you feel in the course of your career that there has been less respect for science or less appreciation of the importance of basic research, and that's why you have to go out and speak positively about it, or is it just a constant you have to keep at it all the time?
I think it is a constant, but I do think that the world now is changing so quickly that sometimes we tend to forget the basics, and so I think it's important to remind what is basic research for and if it is useful or not, and I'm happy to take the debate if people want. I actually have noticed in my path that it is also very country dependent. In some countries, you don't really have to explain what basic research is. People are actually very aware of what this means and what it brings to the society. And in some other countries, people look at you like, what are you doing? Are you in your little lab without just, wearing a lab coat and not doing anything else?
So this is interesting to me because there seems to be a drop-off that little kids are fantastically interested in science, and somehow when they get to be young adults or older, if they don't actually become scientists, they feel, I'm a little put off, where that innate curiosity seems to go away. What do you think is that? What's that about?
I don't know. I think, for sure you have to be driven by curiosity, and that's, I would say, my sole or one of my main motivations. One possibility is that we, as an older people, because I'm glad to be called young scientist here, but if I go back to my lab with my students, they think I'm old. Mm-hmm. And maybe we are not transmitting the right example to them, right? Maybe if we are maybe a little bit more happy and satisfied with what we do, then people will be more motivated to go into science and realize how important it is.
Right, so that's one of the other questions is, what's the right forum to have this discussion? People who are in this room have already self-selected to come, so at some level they believe what you're telling them. Is it a problem of reaching people that don't come in this room?
I think that the platform of the forum, in terms of the activities to engage with the public, to engage the policymakers, is a great opportunity. Because maybe you are convinced, maybe not. I can try to figure out the phases. But if I manage to convince you in the next 20 minutes that science is important, you will probably go out to respective walls and try to act accordingly. But I do think that this is not the only platform where to talk. I think one has to do a lot of activities with the young children, with the schools, which is actually something that we do at Helmholtz, where I am, and tackle education from early on.
Well, we can ask. I don't want to put everybody on the spot because I don't think anybody's going to say science is a waste of time. But just to see a show of hands, do you all agree that science is important and should be part of the forum process? Does anybody disagree, very bravely disagree? But then the question is, do you think that scientists have done an adequate job of making their case to the public? Maybe I could see a show of hands on that. Do you think that scientists need to do more to inform the public about what they're doing? So there is, that's interesting. I don't know if you can catch that on the video, but there are a lot of people in the room who think that scientists can do more. Do you think scientists think that?
I think that not enough scientists think that, and I think not enough of the public think that. I think we have to engage in a two-way dialogue from both sides so that we can actually understand together. If we can manage to get the policymakers together, the scientists together, I think that would really help us to anticipate what's the strategic direction that science should take, how can we help to really look at the scientific endeavor from a more global perspective.
Because it does seem to me that there is an appetite. In talking with younger scientists, they seem to be more interested in engaging than maybe some of their more senior colleagues. Do you think that's true?
I don't have that impression myself. I think the society is large, and so we are a very selected part of the society on this planet, privileged for many reasons. And I think it's fine to target that part of the society, but the society is large, and that's not enough. That should be just a way where we can see these interactions, whether it's older people, kids, or people who have no access to education necessarily. I think we can do several concrete things to help that.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about who scientists are and what they do?
So I wonder, maybe I should also ask, I don't know if I'm allowed, how many people actually understand the purpose of what I call basic research? That was a question.
So say the question again.
So how many people understand really what basic research is? When I talk about basic research, yeah.
So most people, so define basic research.
Yeah, so we actually just wrote a little piece at the forum website if you want to go and have a look into that. So for me, basic research is understanding how life functions, which is the root of being able to later on find a drug that will target a mechanism of a diseased cell, right? If you understand how life functions, then when it dysfunctions in disease, it is much better to actually take this to health and so on.
But okay, so why then should the public fund astronomy when there is no cure for an astronomical disease that the public is waiting for?
Of course, I mean that's a very kind of good question and dilemma at the same time. I'm not sure I'm going to answer, but I guess that if no one questions the purpose of art, right? And art also doesn't cure the society. Art is, we human beings anthropologically look for truth. And astronomy is looking for the truth on how the universe works. Artists, in their own way, are pursuing the truth, and I would say that I also pursue the truth in my endeavors. I think it's a very basic anthropological quality of the human being.
It's a curiosity about the world we live in.
Yeah.
So there's also some gloom about being a scientist right now. Do you know why that is, and do you agree that it's a gloomy time?
So I've heard, and you have heard it during the forum, that science may be under attack. So I am going to say that you could say that maybe there's, and I will comment on 2 points that potentially might be under attack. I don't think this is new. I think this has been a problem or an issue or circumstance for the last 50 years at least. So the first one for me is, as I have been insisting, as you probably noticed, that basic research is important. And it's true that the funding for research lately has been more into what we call translational, right? Can you deliver a drug? Can you deliver a product? And as I said, that is a very important part of the scientific and the research point. But if we don't fund basic research now, in 30 years, there's no translation either. So I think one has to put that part. So I think the risk is in the misconception of what basic research can mean for innovation. And there is a potential challenge out there, which I will also raise in case people are interested in the subject, which is probably more a fear about how these cross borders and the international nature of science may be compromised given the geopolitical situation nowadays. I would say at this point it's more a fear than a fact, but I think we have to be aware of it. And science is by nature international, so my own team has 10 people, and we are 10 different nationalities. I'm so used to it that for me it's just normal, right? And I think for many of you in this audience this is the case as well.
So nationalism and science don't mix?
No. Sorry, no, they don't. I don't think so. And I think actually that makes one of the strengths for the science, because we are all culturally different. We bring different ways of looking at a problem, and this is what makes solving a problem easier or better or synergistic when we all come from different approaches.
So what about the intersection of science and the business community? I mean, obviously, there's a desire to make products, use commerce to exploit scientific findings for gain. Is that something that needs addressing too?
So I think this is a very important part of research, but I don't think this is the only one. And I do think that one has to provide the means to go through the whole chain of production, so to say. Basic, intermediate, translation, product. And maybe I can make a little comment of my institution. So I'm at the Helmholtz Center in Munich. And one of the reasons for me to go there, I moved last year, was that actually they have quite large spectrum from going a little bit into the translational side. So I think bringing these things together is important so the scientific process can actually lead to a productive relationship with business and hospitals.
But I mean, is there any risk that once you get into the business arena that you're once again in a situation where maybe the free exchange of information isn't possible for financial reasons? Yeah,
that is a risk. But so in my experience, actually, with the people who do basic research, some of them do business as well. So I have many colleagues that have startup companies, and maybe some of you do also have. But in general, I think this is based in collaboration, right? And so many of the things that we may or not research are subject to patent. Many basic researchers are actually filing patents, and that can actually be used with a very clear legal framework by the business people. So I don't necessarily see that as a risk, provided that the academic part of the research is free exchange and open for academia.
So you said you've lived in several countries now. Do you see a difference between countries or among countries in terms of they're agreeing with your point of view, or they're being less interested in having science have a role at the table, as it were? I
do think so. Maybe I will give two short examples. So I spent some time in the UK, and it's very clear that, for example, the BBC have really great documentaries. People are much more easy to talk about science when you cross them in the street than in France, where I also spent many, many years, or in Mexico, where I'm from, or even in the US. So there's something in each country, in the policy of each government, that can actually help to make science more accessible to the lay public, right? Because you guys have to understand what we do, and we also have to be able to communicate to you what we do.
So it reminds me, there was someone came and talked to us at NPR once about this. They said that they were talking about screenwriters. If you're writing a movie, and you want to make somebody more sinister or more dangerous, make them a scientist or make them intelligent, right? In the movies, right? So do you think that's, well, first of all, I know you don't think that scientists are sinister, but there...
Well, we may be.
Well, all right, you're not helping.
Sorry.
But why is there some sense of fear or threat or danger or something from the scientific community?
I think because of a lack of communication the public engagement that is also within the mission of the World Economic Forum, that we actually have to do more. If people don't know what we do, it's very easy to have a misconception on it. And human being is very imaginative, so science fiction comes into place very quickly.
Well, let's take you work with something called embryonic stem cells, right? So first of all, describe what an embryonic stem cell is, so that, because I picked that for particular reasons. So go ahead and. So
we work with embryonic stem cells because we are interested in understanding what can give a cell the possibility of derive, as I said at the beginning, either a heart cell or a neuron cell or a skin of the cell, something that we call plasticity.
So how does an embryonic stem cell differ from a heart muscle cell?
Yeah, so because so if you actually think about yourself when you were one cell, because here we all at some point in our mothers were one cell, at that particular point, this one cell gave rise to all the different cell types that you have now in your body. So that is a specificity of embryonic cells, right? They have not yet fixed their fate into a heart or a liver or whatever. So they are very plastic, and that's a natural process of development. We all here went through that, some of us many years ago. And so that's the way we study these stem cells. Because of the potential that they actually can have.
So I've always thought the idea that we started as a single cell and it works. I mean, we divide that cell, and then somehow it turns into us without a leg sticking out of the head most of the time or something like that. But I once made the huge mistake of calling it miraculous when I was talking to Richard Dawkins, and he said, don't use that word. Never mind, it's a point about religion and science. But here's the question. There are people in America who say embryonic stem cells human embryonic stem cells should never be studied. Wrong, morally abhorrent, terrible. How do you confront, as a scientist, there's no rule that says, no, your morals are wrong. So how do you deal with somebody who feels that something you're doing is morally unacceptable and you don't?
Yeah, so there's many points on what you have raised. I'll try to cover 3 of them. So one is just to explain you. So actually, we don't work with human embryos. We work with mouse embryos. We use that as an approach to understand human biology, and that actually does not pose those ethical problems. I actually think that the issue of the ethical considerations of a science is key, and that's one of the reasons why I think we should engage more with the public, because we have to anticipate those ethical problems before they come, and we actually have to come together with lawyers and philosophers and clinicians to see how we deal with that as a society. I have been involved in debates about the genome engineering using CRISPR-Cas9 that many of you may be familiar with.
CRISPR-Cas9? Way of modifying genes in living cells? Okay.
So changing your genes, basically, in the human germline, and this is a huge debate. My conclusion is that it's very difficult to give a universal answer to that, because the problem in China will be seen in one way, the problem in the US will be seen another. So I'm not sure there is a solution, but I think the public needs to be aware of that. And I think that if we manage to engage on more of these conversations, I think that people will understand a little bit better. I have heard a lot of misconceptions about human stem cell work in the US, because they think that every time we get the cells, we kill one embryo, which is actually not true. So I think we just need to be more clear in giving you the facts so that we can engage into a debate.
I think we have an opportunity to take some questions from the floor. Is that correct? Yes, wait for the microphone. And if you don't, Conrad, I'm sorry, we've got to stop meeting like this.
Hi, I'm Conrad, and I try to provide input on this question on governance for technologies. I've spent 20 years in the biotech industry, and your suggestion to engage more with the public, for me, raises a question, and the question is as follows. The faster the science moves, and the further it is detached from the general public and the understanding of the public, the more I think science might have to not only engage with the public, but actually self-regulate. And so my question to you is, how much of your time do you think you or scientists should be spending on thinking about, not waiting for the public to tell them what should we be doing, but rather on self-regulation, because nobody knows what you're doing. You're the only ones who know this. Thank you.
That's the beauty of science. No one else is supposed to know better what you're doing. So I don't think one should give a percentage of the time. As a personal perspective, I can tell you that sometimes my time is elastic. If things are important, you have to fit it in, and it's a matter of priorities. But I think it changes, and one has to be flexible and available for that. So we do a lot of scientific communication with young children who come to the institute and want to learn about science. And I think for me, it's a priority, and one has to do it. So I don't know if that will answer your question. I cannot tell you 10% of my time or 20% of the time. But if I'm called upon participating in a council group for deciding something, I would definitely take the time to do that. The older you get, the more efficient you are in doing other things at work, so you can actually organize your time in a bit of a better place.
Yes, sir. Here comes the microphone.
Thank you for doing this. My name is Bruno. I'm a scientist and astronomer. I'd like to raise a question on, is there such a thing as a non-academic scientist? Non-academic scientist. Thinking that science is a way of getting knowledge and thinking about the skills of a scientist and then applying those skills in other topics. So you know a lot of math, you know a lot of statistics, but instead of applying epigenetics, applying that to a completely different issue. Yeah. So is there a value for that? Why is such a weird idea to think even of a non-academic scientist?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's a weird idea. I think that if you break the scientific method and training into pieces, there's two things that are key: analytical mind and strategic thinking. If you think about a project, it's strategic. So I think those qualities can be used by a lot of people. I think there are leadership qualities. And sometimes people who have done PhDs, if they have good critical thinking and strategic thinking, they'd be great in driving strategic decisions in fields that are not related to science necessarily. So I'm very open-minded about that, and I think we as mentors have the obligation of training our younger generation for future leadership based on those two principles.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just point in fact, I have a PhD and I did research in human physiology before I got into this silly journalism game that I'm doing now. So the question is, when do you stop being a scientist if you're not actually going into a laboratory or working in an academic facility? That's what I always wonder. Am I a scientist, or was I a scientist?
So I have to tell you whether you are a scientist.
Yes.
I think this is a tricky one. I actually think that you can see that if you think about the science as a profession, you're a scientist because you're contributing to the profession. The training is a very important part because, we are all training. Economists are economists because they know about economy. So that's a little bit of semantics. If you see it as a global matter, I could say you are helping to the scientific endeavor.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Nadia, and my company develops women and girls for the engineering and technology industry, and been involved in STEM education for the last 10 years. I'm an engineer by background. And I want to know how much should we be adapting our curriculum, our science curriculums for the future? Because currently the perception is that kids are not doing maths and science because it's boring, and the way it's being taught at schools and universities is seemingly archaic. So how much room is there for innovation in education in the sciences?
I actually,
Yeah, it's a little hard. The acoustics are a little odd. You're asking about ways to teach science differently that would make it more accessible or appealing to younger people? So first of all, is there a problem with the way science is taught? And are there ways to teach it better? Or maybe
I mean, being a scientist, my first reflection would be there's always ways for improvement. Whether some countries or some universities do it in a better place than others or faster, that's difficult to judge. I think there's room for innovation from, for example, the places where I teach. I can see that there's changes, things. Now you are asked to do a lot of visual displays that before you were not asked to do. There's a very strong interest, at least in Germany and in the UK, where I know better, to go to the schools, so high school, go to the children and say, this is science, and do like fancy things like extracting DNA from a banana, these kind of things, to actually spark the interest in the. So I would say yes, but probably we would need something a little bit more structured to have it a global impact.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, I see a hand.
It's a bit of a comment. So my name is Yuval, I'm a scientist as well. You've asked many questions, many diverse questions, but one answer that keeps coming up is better education of science, better public engagement. And I'm not quite sure if that is always the answer. If someone's against embryonic stem cell research, they're against it because they believe, they've got a set of values and a set of beliefs, and it doesn't matter how much you explain to them what the process actually involves, they will still be against it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not quite sure if the answer is always just better engagement with the public, because you can engage with them as much as you want, but if you have different belief systems, then that's not necessarily the answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to tell you why I think that education is most of the answer, because there's a lot of misconception. And as you just say, people are against stem cell research. But what is that specifically? Against derivation of stem cells, against manipulation of stem cells, against differentiation? There's a whole range of possibilities that people don't know. And I think you have to give the people the elements. And then if you tell me, actually, most people, when you ask them about stem cell research, they don't really know what it is, and they don't know where the stem cells come from. So I do believe that if people have clear ideas of what we do and what are the implications ethically and biologically, I think most of the problem will be sorted. Having said so, you're right. If I can explain you from A to Z what the process is, and you tell me, well, I am against that because I don't like killing embryos, let's put it radical, of course you will never change your mind, but at least you will have a conscious and knowledgeable opinion about the problem, and not something that is just from this sensationalism that is very often seen in science.
Well, having an argument where you know what you're talking about is a good thing.
Exactly.
I think that's where I think that's a good place to end this discussion. Please join me in thanking Maria-Elena for.
Thank you.